Today, I'm going to just put a disclaimer on today's sermon and say this is a PG-13 sermon, but I'm looking out, I don't see any PG-13 folks that can't handle it. So I'm just going to put it this way. This is going to create a great discussion for dads to have with their young people on the way home today. Let's put it that way. So if you're over 13, I'm not drawing any pictures or anything, but we're going to be talking about some things. One of the things we want to talk about Romans 12 today, one of the things is that Romans is saying that don't pretend to love, right? Don't let love be genuine. So I want to talk, particularly since it's Father's Day, to men today about what does it look like to express genuine love. And Romans lays out a lot of things here about expressing genuine love. And I want to particularly talk about how one of the things that love does is love keeps its commitments, right? Now, that's what part of love does. So let me ask you a question, guys, particularly guys. I was raised in not so a litigious society where if a man came to you or you went to someone and you shook that man's hand and you looked him in the eye and said, I'm going to do that, that was as good as a contract. What? You remember the days when you didn't have all these contracts? If you said you were going to do something, you were going to do it, right? How many people were raised that way, that if you shook somebody's hand, looked them in the eye, and you said you were going to do it, you were going to do it. You were going to get it done, right? Maybe you said that to your boss. Maybe you said that to a friend or a neighbor. Maybe you've said it to somebody else. And you would say that a person who does that, in particular of the male species, you would say you are a man of your word, right? Are you a man of your word? That's my question this morning. Fathers, dads, men, are you a man of, you're not sure. Wait a second, where's he going with this, right? So, let me tell you and remind us, men, of another day in our lives, if we got married, or if one day we will be married, we took somebody's hand, we looked her in the eye, and we made a promise. And we said, I'm a man of my word. Do you remember what that promise is? Because not only did you make that promise, not only did you take her hand, not only did you look her in your eye, but you put a ring on it. You put a ring on that hand to remind you and her of that promise, of that commitment, of that genuine love that you committed to in your marriage. Now, you may be in a marriage right now, and that would be true for you. Maybe one day you're thinking about marriage, and that would be something to think about. So I want to remind you of what you promised. And I'm going to use what I use at all weddings, and probably something like that. You said something similar at your wedding. And there are different things and that you might say. And here's what we say. I'll ask this question of a couple. I say, will you have to be your wife, to live together in holy marriage? Will you love her, comfort her, honor and keep her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all others, be faithful to her as long as you both shall live? Will you be faithful? Will you forsake all others? Will you honor? Will you comfort? Will you do these things regardless and for the rest of your life? So that's took a hand, looked in the eye, and you made this promise. So the question is, are you a man of your word? Are you keeping that word? Are you keeping that promise? To use an old phrase from a long time ago in the church, are you a promise keeper? Are you a person who keeps promises? Is that part of it? Now, we're looking at Romans today because Romans is actually talking about this kind of faithful love that is to be expressed within the church, not just husbands and wives, but in the church. And the reason that Paul is writing this, he's writing this letter to the church in Rome. And in the church in Rome, there were two cultures that were coming together in the Christian church. There were Jewish Christians and there were Roman Christians, Hellenistic Christians. And they came from two different cultures, two different ways of life. And they would come to church together. And sometimes these two different cultures worshiping together created some conflict within the church. Now, I know we've never been in a church where there's conflict. Who's ever heard of such a thing, right? But so Paul's writing this letter to the church saying, when you're with each other, when you're together, and actually not just with you, but with everybody, here's what genuine love looks like. Here's how to express love to one another in relationship. Now, when I look at my own marriage, I won't throw anybody else's marriage under the bus, but I think that in marriage, I find myself, sometimes I feel like I am with a person of another culture. You know, there's a person that's different than me. We come from different ways of thinking. We come from different cultures almost, so to speak, even though we're equal and of equal worth, but we're still different, right? And so God, what are you doing? Why bring these two cultures together in this relationship of commitment and bonding and faithfulness? And I think there's something actually beautiful happening in this relationship. And I think what happened, the beautiful thing that is happening is that I am actually learning how to love. You know, I learn best how to love in relationship. When I start to get out of relationship, I'm not learning to love. When I'm off by myself, I'm not learning how to love. It's only when I'm in relationship with someone who may be different than me that I actually learn how to love. And so marriage is a lifelong process of learning how to love. I look at it that way. I've learned to love better. My wife even told me I'm getting better. So that's good news, right, guys? All right. So one of the things that we promise, so the three things that we promise is love, we've been talking about. But the two things I want to pick up on today for men, two things. Guys, I kept it simple, two. I didn't come up with a 4 or 5 point sermon. I got a 2-point sermon, but one's really long. All right. So we promised to honor our wives. We promised to comfort our wives. Honor and comfort. We promised these things. So Romans 12:10 says this, love each other with genuine affection. That means don't pretend, but with genuine affection, not hypocritically, and take delight in honoring each other. Take delight, that means enjoy, honoring each other. Honor our wives. We promised we would honor our wives. Now, for the Greek lesson this morning, there are 4 words in Greek that are translated love. We say love, 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 but in Greek there are 4 words, and I'm going to go to you all. Who knows one of the Greek words for love? If you've heard any of Pastor Matt's sermons, you probably know. What's that? Agape, right. So you've got agape, right? And that means that's God's love towards us. It's an unconditional love, regardless, that sees the value in another person and loves unconditionally. So you've got agape love. There are 3 other words. Can anybody, I'm going to see if there's any advanced students in the room. Anybody name another one? Oh, now you're going way too far, Tom. I'm only looking for, there you go. All right. So there you go. Now we're together. All right. So these preachers in the room, they throw everything off, right? Phileo, which is where we get the word, or Philadelphia, the city of what? Brotherly love, right? It's only if you're from Philadelphia that you'll experience brotherly love. But if you're a Redskin fan and you go to Philadelphia, you're not going to get this. So, but it's phileo, which means brotherly love or devotion. Like David and Jonathan in the Old Testament, they were devoted to one another. They were loyal to each other. So there's this kind of sense of loyalty and brotherly love. All right, preacher or anybody else, what's the third one? All right, don't go there yet, but you're right. I'm going to get there. One more I'm looking for. It's actually one that's lesser known. It's called storge. So storge is familiar love, like a love for a parent has for a child. So if a parent has a love for their child, that is storge, right? It's familiar, it's deep affection, deep love for, and it's a familiar, it's a family bond type of statement. And so the word that we translate honor in this passage is these 2 words together. Phileo, storge. Deep affection plus devotion. Deep affection and familiar love with loyalty and brotherly love. If you put these 2 together, that's where you get honor in this passage. This is honoring. So when we say we honor our wives or our spouses, this go both ways. Men and women. We honor one another. We're phileo and storge. We are loyal and deeply devoted and deep affection for. Okay? That's what it means to honor. So part of honoring and loving, so notice that the three of the words for love in the Greek New Testament are used in this one verse. One verse. 3 different words used. Now, David's right. There's one other word for love, and that is eros, from where we get the word erotic, and this is where we go PG-13. This refers to sexual passion. Now, you with me so far? So, we've got this. Let me just timeline this out for you, because what I'm saying is to be faithful to our wives, to forsake all others. When we promise, that means forsake all other what? Relationships, real or imagined or fantasy, because there's another word that the Greek leads us to called porneo, which is sexual immorality, promiscuity, which we heard also read in Romans, which is where we get the word pornography from, okay? So that is different. But when we say we're going to forsake all others, I think that includes those other relationships. So, now, men, we understand this, and it's true for women too, but let me timeline this out for us, because I think this is where the honoring comes in play. So you and I are, how do I say that? We're born, right? Ground zero, your birth. Happy birthday, by the way. So ground zero, you're born. And you actually start to experience, hopefully, you're in a family, and hopefully you get to experience some agape, some phileo, and some storge from whoever raises you. Right? Your dad, your mom, whoever is in your life. And so hopefully you're learning to love even after you're born. And you learn that because you're experiencing these three types of love, hopefully, and not everyone does, but hopefully that's happening. And so you go through life and you're experiencing these three types of love, hopefully, and then we'll just call this time period in the middle school years called the transition to maturity. How's that? How's that for vocabulary, right? For dodging that bullet, right? Right. So, all right. So then you go through this transition of maturity about middle school years, and all of a sudden, what starts to kick in out of these three in the middle school years? Which of the four words start to kick in? Eros, right. Now, eros starts to kick in. We're familiar with agape, phileo, storge, but then all of a sudden, this very strong desire for eros, because that's the way God made us. This is part of God's design. This is not a bad thing. So this eros starts to kick in, and guys, you know, or you may remember, let's go back in time. You remember how strong, guys, how strong is eros when you're a teenager? How strong? Everybody's laughing. It's like middle school all over again. Right. It's when your grades go down because you can't keep focus right. So maybe I don't want to go R. We're not going R. We're just PG-13 today. All right. So what happens is we start to experience this very strong drive, and to some point, we can't even think about these other three. All we can think about is eros. So, and then, one day we're thinking, I'm going to get married, right? And I'm going to hopefully experience eros, right? So, but what's our culture saying to us in the meantime? Another thing that's very challenging today, that probably is getting more challenging, is that this point of marriage keeps getting pushed further and further away from that transition period. And so this period of time where eros is kicked in and we're not in a marriage relationship is getting longer. And so I realize there's a challenge here in terms of honoring not only ourselves and ourselves today, but if we're going to get married in the future, it's tough to honor our future spouse that one day we will make a promise to, right? And say, I'm going to be faithful to you, right? And so does that honoring begin here, or does it begin when we get married? Because a lot of times we assume it begins when we get married. I would suggest you can actually back, and we'll talk about that. What's the culture saying to us? Well, here's some things I've heard our culture say. I've heard our culture say to us, well, you need to practice before you get married. I've actually heard people say that. That, you need to get practice, you need to get experience so that when you're married, you know what's going on, you know what you're doing. So get some practice in before you get married. Or get some experience. Or another message we hear sometimes is, experience as much eros as you can because you're going to be stuck with one person for the rest of your life, you know? Like, oh my gosh, come on. Obviously, you've never been married. So if you're thinking that, you know, get the experience, get the practice, all this stuff, you want to be prepared for marriage, let me just remind you, so look, there's a little bit of time here and a little bit of time here, but the rest of your life, you have the rest of your marriage to practice, right? You got a lot more time to experience eros than you think. So, when we promise at marriage to be faithful, forsake all others, to be faithful, to not allow these other relationships in, what we're creating is exclusivity. Yeah, sorry. So, all right, so exclusivity. It is spelled right, just trust me. All right, so exclusivity is what creates, and the reason that marriage relationship is exclusive, and you know, because we're an inclusive culture, but this is the one place where to be exclusive. Because when we're exclusive, what that creates is intimacy. I'm like sweating up here, guys. I'm sorry. So this is a tough one. All right. It's PG-13. I'm trying not to go R. All right. So exclusivity leads to intimacy. And here, so let me ask you this question. What's intimacy? Because guys, men, we confuse, I'm going to speak to the men just for a minute. You and I, men, we have this tendency to confuse intimacy with eros. We have a tendency to confuse sex with intimacy. I would suggest to you that intimacy is when you put all four together. It is a deep connection. In fact, it's the deepest kind of connection that if you want to experience intimacy, you need all four types of love, and you need them exclusively. And that's what creates intimacy. So when we say we're going to forsake all others, what we're doing is we're actually building something we talked about a couple years ago called Guardrails. You remember we did a sermon series, some of you have been around, called Guardrails. And so when we say make that promise, we're putting a guardrail around this relationship, okay? And we're building these guardrails, and we're saying nobody else can come in. We're going to keep that guardrail so we don't go off track. And so, because our hope is that within this marriage relationship, we're going to experience intimacy, agape, phileo, storge, and eros together. But when we stray out of that exclusivity, what we're tending to do is trade eros for intimacy. We want eros, and that's what culture tells us. We want this without any of this, right? I just want the passion, but I don't want to have to love somebody unconditionally or phileo and storge. And actually, pornography is just eros without anything else, right? So that's the danger. If you want intimacy, all this, there's exclusivity. Now, last question. When do you start building your guardrails? And I'm particularly looking at people not married, single, that may one day see themselves as married. When do you think you start building the guardrails? Because a lot of times we think, what? Well, when I get married, I'll put the guardrail in place, right? We think that once we get married, then I'll build the guardrail. I'm going to suggest something radical, that you start building it in this transition period. This is where you start building the guardrails. Because when you do that, because if you can't learn to honor yourself and others in this period where the eros is the strongest, if you can't learn to honor there, you're less likely to bring that honoring into your exclusive marriage relationship. So when you learn to honor here, and I would say, you know, if there's a man who is not honoring women here and not honoring you here, they're not going to honor you when they put a ring on your finger. Look at their track record is what I'm saying, right? And, you know, this is why, you know, in the college atmosphere, you hear about, you know, people say, well, we're not dating, we're just hooking up, right? That's a culture of not honoring each other. And so we need to learn to honor here so that when we get to here, we know what it is to honor one another, and we will experience intimacy, which is God's design for marriage. So I'm telling you what's best. I'm not telling you what's easiest. Does that make sense? So this is not what's easiest, but it is what's best. So, you heard enough PG. Can we move on from here? I want to hit the other point, right? And that is the other verse here out of Romans, which says, be happy with those who are happy, and weep with those who weep. Now, when I got married, if you're married, men, we said that we would comfort our wives. Now, my wife, who comes from another culture to a certain degree, she cries. She weeps. And when she's upset or when she's stressed out, she weeps. And when she weeps, and I'm still getting used to this, but when she weeps, I, as a guy who have been taught in my culture, right, not to cry, right? So here I am now married and promised to comfort this person who is now weeping before me, and I'm going, what did I do wrong, right? I'm like, what did happen? How do I handle that? I don't know what to do, right? Guys, are you with me? Right? I don't know how to handle it. I'm from another culture. This is not how we handle it in our culture. And I don't know what it's like to do. But I made a promise to comfort. And Paul says, love is happy with those who are happy and weeps with those who weep. So I haven't necessarily gone to the level of crying with my wife. Not that we haven't shed tears together, we have. But what I'm saying is that there are times where I need to comfort her. Yeah, I made a promise to comfort her. And so I asked a very dangerous question this week. I went to my wife and I said, so I said to her, what would comfort you? And she said, this is for a sermon, isn't it? I said, yes, all right. So I said, what would comfort you? What would comfort you? And I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't like the answer because I thought I was doing a good job. But here's what she said to me, and I'm going to give you verbatim pretty much what my wife said to me that would comfort her. She said, well, I need you to do more than listen to me. Wait a second. I'm already learned that. Come on. So I thought I was doing good. But what I realized and what she was telling me, you got to read between the lines. But what she was telling me was that, Matt, when you listen, you're logical. You're analytical. You're listening to me, but you're still using your logic and your analytical skills, and you're listening with logic and analysis and responding out of logic and analysis, and that's not always comforting. I told you, two different cultures. And so I said, well, what else do I need to do, right? And I'm genuinely asking her. And she says, well, sometimes I just need you to hug me. Okay, I can do that, right? I can handle that, right? And then she said, sometimes I just need you to tell me it's going to be all right. I just need you to tell me it's going to be okay. I don't need the analysis. I don't need the logic. I just need you to affirm me and appreciate me and tell me it's going to be okay. That's what would comfort me. And what I'm still learning, because I'm still learning how to love, like you are and I am, is what I'm learning is that to comfort is really, not only do I need to be the protector of my wife's physical health, right? If somebody were attacking my wife, I would protect her, right? But I'm also to be the protector of her heart. I need to be protecting and comforting and making sure her heart is okay. And as I've said to married couples, oftentimes I say, when you get married, your fingerprints ought to be all over the heart of your spouse. You ought to know what makes them happy, be happy with those who are happy, and you ought to know what makes them weep, weep with those who weep. Comfort them. Be there with them. Be the protector of their heart. And guys, I want to add one more thing about this. Is that sometimes the way we speak to our wives is not as protector of their heart, but we actually do heart damage to them with the words we say. That sometimes the words we use and the way we communicate as guys, again, different culture, The coach that yelled at you to get your butt on the field is sometimes damaging to the heart of our spouse. So what works in this culture does not work in marriage. And that you and I can sometimes do great damage to the heart that we swore and promised to protect and comfort. The point is this: be the protector of your wife's heart. Be a keeper of your promises. Be a protector of her heart. Be faithful to her and exclusively hers. And I know what I'm asking you to do is tough. It's hard. I know, actually, I'm not asking. I think the Scripture asks us of it. God asks us to do this. And in fact, we promise to do it. So there's one other thing we need as men, and that is what Paul says at the end of that passage in 13. He says this: instead, clothe yourselves with the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ, and don't let yourself think about ways to indulge your evil desires. Clothe yourself with Christ. Guys, men, women, all of us, we can't love without clothing ourselves with Christ, without Christ's presence in our lives. So we actually have to invite Christ to be ourselves to be clothed with the presence of Christ, who loved. How did Jesus love? Unconditionally, sacrificially. Jesus loved us with agape, phileo, storge, and Paul says in another letter, husbands, love your wives as Christ did the church. Amen.